Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing a concerted effort to force him from office after 12 straight years in power. Ultra-nationalist leader Naftali Bennett and centrist Yair Lapid have joined forces to try and form a national coalition government. It's hoped it will break the political deadlock caused by 4 inconclusive elections within the last 2 years. Politicians have until Wednesday to reach a deal, which Netanyahu says poses a threat to Israel's national security. For more on this, we're joined from Tel Aviv by Dahlia, Scheindlin, political consultant and public opinion expert. Mrs. Scheindlin, thank you very much for joining us here on EuroNews. With less than 48 hours to go, are we witnessing the beginning of the end for Netanyahu?
We are witnessing an attempt at the beginning of the end. I think the key word that you said before was try. It looks more likely now than at any time recently, certainly at any time over the last 2 years, that there will be a government that is not led by the Likud and Mr. Netanyahu after Naftali Bennett announced his decision to join Yair Lapid, who is the head of the second largest party in Israel and currently has the mandate to form a government. That was considered the major key to being able to reach a coalition with somewhat of a majority. And the reason why I say somewhat of a majority is because that government, that coalition, as it's shaping up, doesn't exactly have 61 seats out of 120 needed for a coalition. It will be depending on the support of an Arab party representing the Islamic movement in Israel for the vote of confidence to reach 61, the majority, to vote that government into existence. In other words, there are still a number of hurdles to be crossed before we can say that this government is final, and many opportunities along the way for the negotiations to collapse. But we are closer than in the past to having such a government.
Now, if they do manage to come up with an alliance here, Bennett and Lapid come from opposed political spheres. How difficult will it be for them to actually govern together?
It will not be easy. And the interesting thing is that I don't even think the biggest gap is between Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid is a centrist mainstream party. Naftali Bennett is certainly a firm right-wing party, even to the right of Netanyahu. But I think the bigger gaps will come from the other coalition partners, specifically the left-wing Zionist parties, the Labor Party and Meretz. Now, these parties represent the left wing of Israeli society, and they are significantly opposed to Bennett, who represents the firm right, on issues related to, I would say the towering issues are the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what Israel should do about, the conflict, Gaza, the West Bank, but also with relation to how they view Israel's domestic institutions, particularly differences over the role of the judiciary in Israeli life, which is becoming an increasingly central issue. They're going to have major disagreements between those right and left-wing flanks of the coalition, which is probably going to be a greater tension even than between Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett. It will certainly not be the world's easiest coalition. Lots of room, even after such a coalition would be established, for collapse.
And now, if there is no deal, we could see Israeli voters head to the polls for the 5th time in 2 years. How tired are they of all this?
Well, Israeli voters are certainly very tired. There's no question. Every citizen expresses lots of frustration, not only about going through the voting exercise, but the waste of public funds. Israel does have publicly funded elections, certainly at a time when the country's been going through many crises, including the corona crisis and the escalation with Gaza more recently. However, all of that exhaustion does not mean Israelis will give up on the chance to vote, because as much as they are exhausted and frustrated with their politicians, no one political side wants the other side to get the advantage in elections. And if everybody stays home on one side, the other side will win. So I think that as exhausted as Israelis are, and as much of this as they're tired of this loop, on the other hand, I think they still take very seriously their political choice and would prefer to vote rather than have the other side win, whatever that other side is, depending on who the citizen is. So we could be headed into a 5th election. It's not impossible. For the moment, it seems to be a little bit more remote than a few weeks ago, but we'll have to see what happens over the next 48 hours. And then over the course of the next week, even if Lapid announces that he has been able to form a government, there is still a week in which that government has to be sworn in. During that week, anything can happen as well.
Oh, wow. All right. We will be monitoring this fascinating story. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Dahlia Scheindlin, live for us from Tel Aviv.